You made a lot of recommendations to the Overwatch developers, and they've already implemented some of them immediately for the visuals. But also, you've talked about deepening the pool of information to pull from to analyze gameplay and strategy. What would you like to see in that department?
Well, ideally at some point they'll release their API so that stats sites can draw info from games more directly. Right now, in my opinion, the best stats site out there is Winston's Lab, winstonsLab.com. There's a little plug for those guys because I love them. They're awesome. I think they're like two dudes in Germany that make this site, if I remember right. But they actually they have a way to read the VODs to aggregate information. And so there's some fancy like software trickery there that lets them do all that and get all these stats. But once Blizzard allows more direct access to things, then the opportunity for stats just goes through the roof, right? And a lot of that's going to be really useful in the broadcast. But that brings us into the interesting conversation about Overwatch and what stats are important, because that's been one of the most surprising challenges, actually. I don't know if I'm getting too far away from your question here, but that's been one of the most interesting challenges in Overwatch is what stats are actually important. Because you look at the traditional kills, deaths, assists, there's so many factors that go into it. You look at something like if you want to judge a tank. I was just having this conversation with some of the guys from Blizzard at the office yesterday. How do you judge tank stats properly? And you're like, well, you could look at time spent alive, and you're like, well, yeah, but what if their healer is having a bad day, or what if their Zarya is having a bad day and she's not shielding the Winston when he jumps in, or what if they're just playing more aggressively, or what if it's like a Reinhardt that's too afraid to engage, so he lives a long time, but it's only because he's not contributing like he should to the team. So they're like, well, what if you look at damage blocked? And it's like, well, again, is damage blocked really a good stat? Because yeah, sometimes it could be a sign of them preventing damage from hitting their team. Other times it could just be the width of Reinhardt's shield catching things that wouldn't have hit anyone anyway. It could be a team that's too nervous to engage again. So is that really a good thing? So there's lots of stats that look good on the surface, but then once you think about it, there's so many extra factors that factor into it that you can't really use it as a litmus for judging players. So yeah, finding the stats to judge players properly is going to be one of the toughest things to do in Overwatch. I know that right now we're liking stats that are based on minutes, like damage per minute, for instance, seems like a good stat. There's other stats that I like time to first ultimate is a stat that I like. If you want to look at like one tracer versus another tracer, if you have someone who over a season consistently gets their ultimates, their first pulse bomb, like 5 seconds faster than everybody else, then I think that's a good indicator that person's really good at getting in there and doing damage and surviving, and building that ultimate. So there's some stats out there that I think will be useful, but it's going to be unlike, any other esports so far statistically, which and I'm terrible at math and all that stuff, but it's still very interesting. I try at least,